So we will use the simple example database to look at queries in our lecture today. The database contains three tables: a table called student that contains student information, a table called course that contains information about courses, and a table called enrolls in, which, as you can see, is a relationship table between these two entities. So student and course correspond to entities in our entity relationship model, and enrolls in is a relationship. And we can see that the relationship is defined by a key from the student table and a key from the class table. So what we have in our database is three tables: the student table, which has a key social security number, a course table that has a key course number, and the enrolls in table that has a composite key that contains social security number and course number, right? Assuming, of course, that no student can enroll in more than once in a class, right? That's an assumption there. So we got this stuff here. So this is our basic structure that we're going to work with. So the first thing you want to do is to add this data into your database, right? We'll take the database schema itself and create that in our database, and then we're going to work through that to add the various table data as well and use that in our examples. So let's do that and walk through these steps a little bit over here. So the first thing you want to do is to download these two files, schoolschema.sql and schooldata.sql from our course website. Once you've downloaded them and you're set to go, we're going to run these two files. So what we can do in SQL is you can take a bunch of queries and put them into a single file and then run them as a group in your from your client, whatever client it is. So these two files, schoolschema.sql, contains the schema definition, which is the definitions of the tables, the fields, and the keys and all that kind of stuff. So it's got the create commands. And the schooldata.sql contains the actual data that is going to go into the tables itself. So once we've done that, you want to open MySQL Workbench, which we've done before. Then you want to open schoolschema.sql, and let me walk you through those steps and execute the script. So let's walk through that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kill this window here, and if you look at this little tab over here, which looks like a folder under query 1, I click on that, and now this allows me to open up a file that contains the query that I want to execute, the bunch of query that I want to execute. So my files are sitting in this directory called Hardeep Johar, and if I go down here, I get schoolschema.sql, and I want to open that. And when I open that, this just shows up over here. So let's walk through some of these steps to understand how SQL works. So here, the first line that I have in this thing is drop database if exists schooldb. So what this does is it makes sure that if I already have schooldb defined for some reason or the other in my database, in my database server, then I want to drop it. I don't want it to be there anymore. So that's because it's a test sample. Definitely you don't want to do this as a general rule, because you might be dropping a database that is kind of useful, right? And it'll just drop it. So you want to be careful, especially since you're root. Then I create the schooldb, and this is, we've already seen this command. It says create database if not exists schooldb. We know it won't exist because I just dropped it, but it's there. And then I use schooldb. Now I want to create the three tables that we have in our that we want to define for our database. The three tables are student, that's this one, course, that's this one, and enrolls in, that's this one. For each table, I have a create table command, and what I say is, if the table doesn't exist, then create it. I don't want to overwrite an existing table. For each table, I define the fields. So for the student table, I have 6 fields: SSN, FName, LName, phone, city, and zip. And for each field, I have to explain what data type that field is. So in this case, they're all varchar. Varchar means a character field of variable length. So some people's name is John, and other people's name is Matthew, or Gillibrand, or whatever. So everyone has different name lengths, and so varchar essentially says you can have differing name lengths, and they don't have to be exactly X characters or something like that. So generally text fields, I mean, they could be, for example, I could have used car 11 for social security number because social security numbers are always 11. So if you use car, you have to have the same exact amount. If you use varchar, then you can have a variable amount. So generally, it's safer to use varchar, but I could have actually used for both car, for zip as well as social security number, I could have just used car. The next thing I say is that social security number, for example, is not null. That means that I cannot have a student in my student table who does not have a social security number. Right? Everyone has to have a social security number. So not null says that this particular field cannot be null. So in general, all my fields are not null except for the phone field. So a student perhaps doesn't have a telephone, kind of odd, but you never know. And the score field in the enrolls in, because obviously before the semester started, they don't have a final score, so that could be null, right? They don't. There have been no, let's say, evaluation mechanisms that have been started so far, initiated so far. So that's the main thing here. So not null essentially says that this field cannot be null. If you add data into the table, then you want to make sure that that data is there, otherwise it won't work. Then finally, the last thing I have here is this word called primary key. And what primary key says is that social security number is the primary key for the table. What the database will do is it'll ensure that I cannot have more than one instance of the social security number field in my table. So that's one of the advantages of primary keys. It makes sure that you can't duplicate them. So only one row for every student. In the case of course, one row for each course number, because course number is the primary key. And in the case of the enrolls in, my key is a composite key because I have both the social security number as well as the class in the key. So what I do is I add a constraint over here which says that I'm going to create a primary key called pk underscore enroll. It's like a creation on the fly, and that is a composite of social security number and class. In this case, the primary key is going to be used mainly for indexing the table. Right? That's the goal really with this thing over there. So that's our basic structure, and this is now is going to, once we run this, is actually going to create these three tables. And to run this, all I need to do is to go to this little lightning thing over there and click on it, and I get this stuff here, and I want to make sure that it's all run properly. It says one warning over here because I'd already deleted SchoolDB, so I couldn't actually create it again, so that's gone. And then everything else seems to have worked fine. So it's always a good idea to check to see that all these, every query has a green check mark next to it to make sure everything worked properly. So that's our database defined, and we can go back and check this stuff to see whether it actually worked or not. So if I just delete all this, I could do show tables and run that, and I get course, enrolls in, and student. Right, my three tables are defined in this thing here. I can see if they've been defined correctly by looking at the describe. So let's say describe enrolls in. A couple of things about queries. Every SQL query has to end with a semicolon, because that allows us, of course, to use multiple lines if we want to. And as a matter of convention, the keywords in the query are, the actual SQL commands are often, in uppercase. So I usually have to do something like this, right? That's just convention. It's not required. And the third thing is that even though the table is called enrolls in, it's not case sensitive. So this is not really case, SQL is not case sensitive. It doesn't care whether you define it as uppercase, it has to be uppercase. It's very unlike Python variables in that respect. So yes, we have all these three things here, and it says SSN class score. Note that we have key primary here because it was a this was a required thing there, and that's it really, right? So, and this says no for null. They can't be null, and score can be null. Okay, that's what we defined it as. So that's our the first step here. We've got that in.